Have you ever noticed how quiet some people get right after you stop letting them control you? It's subtle at first. There's no explosion, no shouting, just silence. They used to have a presence that filled the room. Now they shrink back, lips curved into a faint smile. But something in their eyes doesn't match the grin. And you feel it. That still, eerie moment. Like walking into a room after a thunderstorm, where the air still crackles with electricity, but no one's talking about the lightning anymore. They don't confront you. They don't argue. Because now, they're evolving. You've changed the rules of the game, and now they're rewriting the playbook. When a manipulator realizes they can't bend you anymore, they don't leave, they adapt. This is what most people never notice. When someone loses control over you, they try to control the narrative around you. And that's where the real danger begins. Because power doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it slips out the back door, then circles the house and comes in through the window, dressed like an apology, smiling like a friend, whispering like a secret. And if you're not careful, you'll think the storm passed, when in reality, it just changed shape. So what do? When they can't control you anymore? They don't vanish. They shift. They play the victim. They twist your strength into selfishness. They plant whispers. They bait you with guilt. They perform reconciliation. Not because they've changed, but because they've recalculated. This is the new form of control. And if you've ever felt that hollow ache in your chest after standing your ground, if you've ever second-guessed your peace because someone else made you feel guilty for finally protecting it, you're not alone. This is a pattern. It's not personal. It's strategic. And once you learn to see it, you'll never unsee it again. This isn't just a script. This is a map, not to escape them, but to find yourself again beneath the fog they left behind. Because here's the truth. When someone has built their identity around controlling you, your freedom feels like betrayal to them. They don't want the real you. They want the version of you that doesn't resist. The one that apologizes just to keep the peace. The one that shrinks so they can stand taller. The one that doubts yourself so they don't have to face their own weakness. But the moment you stop playing small, they panic. Not always loudly. Sometimes it's the quiet panic, the kind that creeps into their tone, the kind that turns compliments into backhanded praise, the kind that hides behind phrases like, "You've changed," "I'm worried about you," "You used to be so easy to talk to." Translation? You're no longer easy to control, and that's a threat. But here's the good news. You've already won the first battle. You stopped responding out of fear. You stopped chasing approval. You stopped shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. Now, you just need to understand what comes next. Because this shift, this silent collapse of their control, is where most people fall back in. They mistake the calm for healing. They mistake the smile for sincerity. They mistake the silence for peace. But it's not peace. It's repositioning. The manipulator is watching now, waiting, choosing the next tactic. Because when they lose direct control, they try to control indirectly. They move from commands to whispers, from guilt to gossip, from confrontation to performance. And if you don't see it coming, you'll be pulled back in, not by their force, but by your own compassion. So let's make something clear. Compassion does not require submission. Understanding does not require surrender. Forgiveness does not require a second chance. You don't owe access to someone just because they used to have it. You don't owe softness to someone who weaponized your silence. You don't owe an explanation to someone who ignored the 1,000 you already gave. You owe yourself one thing, your peace. And if you've reclaimed it, hold it like fire, because they'll try to steal it with subtlety, not force. They'll ask questions laced with guilt. They'll float rumors dipped in charm. They'll test you with smiles that look like grace but feel like glass. So how do you respond? You don't react. You observe. You listen with your eyes more than your ears. You let the silence answer what words try to disguise. And when the time comes, when the tactic shifts from silence to smear, from guilt to praise, from distance to fake closeness, you don't collapse. You stand, not loudly, not defensively, but with clarity. And you remember, this isn't a personal attack. It's a desperate attempt to regain control over something they never truly owned, you. Because control is borrowed, but truth is yours. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. What I seek is the truth." That's the difference. The manipulator fears truth. You invite it. They hide in performance. You live in clarity. They twist silence into threat. You use silence as power. So, let's begin this journey together. Over the next 4 parts, I'll show you each tactic they use once control slips. Not to fight them, but to free yourself, fully, finally, and permanently. Because this isn't about them anymore. It's about you, your mind, your dignity, your alignment. And the strongest thing you'll ever do is learn how to stay unshaken in the face of subtle warfare. So breathe, pause. We're just getting started. Next up, they play the victim. Because your strength threatened their story. Stay with me. They couldn't bend you. So now, they break the story instead. See, when a manipulator loses control of your behavior, they try to control the narrative about you. They stop confronting you directly. They stop trying to convince you privately. Because they already know that part of the game is over. So they choose something far more insidious. They become the victim. Suddenly, they're the one who's been hurt, the one who was just trying to help, the one who tried everything. And you're cold, you're ungrateful, you've changed. But here's the truth. They hope no one sees. You didn't change. You just stopped playing a role in their performance. And now that the spotlight has shifted away from their control, they step onto the stage with a new mask. Tears instead of tactics, whispers instead of warnings. This is where most people get confused, because it looks like regret. It sounds like remorse, but it's not. It's strategy, and you'll recognize it by its patterns. They don't ask you how they hurt you. They only ask why you're being so distant. They don't reflect. They redirect. They say things like, "I just wanted what was best for you. You were never like this before. I don't even know who you are anymore." They cloak themselves in suffering, not to heal, but to flip the script. Because if they're the victim, you must be the villain. And that, for them, is a way to get back in control. Not of your decisions, but of how others see you. That's what this tactic is really about. They can't shape your actions anymore. So they try to reshape your image, quietly, subtly, behind closed doors, through sighs and tones and vague implications. I don't want to get into it, but let's just say I've been through a lot lately. You don't really know them the way I do. No facts, no accountability, just enough ambiguity to turn heads, because they don't need to convince everyone. They just need enough people to doubt you. So you start doubting yourself again. But that's where your strength gets tested, not in how you respond with words, but in how you stay anchored in your own truth. Because when someone weaponizes victimhood, they're not asking to be understood. They're asking for an audience. And you don't need to perform. Not anymore. Epictetus once said, "He who blames others has a long way to go on his journey." It's simple. When someone is quick to cast themselves as the wounded one, especially after you've drawn a boundary, they're not seeking growth. They're seeking cover. And when you respond with defensiveness, when you chase down every rumor, every misinterpretation, every side comment, you fall right back into the trap. Because now you're reacting again. Now you're explaining again. Now you're asking for fairness from someone who used your empathy as a leash. So, what do? You stay quiet. but not silent. You let your characters speak louder than their performance. You don't chase the lies, you embody the truth. There's a woman I know. Let's call her Lauren. She was in a long-term relationship where she gave and gave, but over time, the balance became toxic. She was carrying everything, emotionally, financially, spiritually. And one day, she finally said, "No more." She didn't scream, she didn't shame, she simply walked away. And almost immediately, the narrative changed. He told mutual friends, "I don't know what happened to Lauren. She's not the same. She's so cold now." And people believed it. At first, because he sounded hurt, because he sounded sincere, because he said it softly, with just enough sadness in his voice to seem real. But Lauren didn't bite. She didn't defend herself to people who already doubted her. She didn't try to edit the version of her that lived in someone else's mouth. She just kept living, aligned, authentic, still. And over time, the truth outlasted the noise. Because while he was performing, she was healing. And healing is louder than gossip. But it doesn't have to raise its voice. So how do you respond when someone casts themselves as the victim, just to make your strength look like cruelty? 3 simple things. First, don't react to the image they're painting. You're not required to explain your integrity to people committed to misunderstanding it. Second, don't chase sympathy from the crowd. This isn't a PR campaign, it's a personal journey. Third, let time reveal the difference between sincerity and manipulation. Because the truth has a way of resurfacing. And when it does, it's undeniable. Remember, a manipulator doesn't need to tell the truth. They just need to tell a better sounding lie to the right audience at the right time. But a Stoic doesn't live for the crowd. They live by principle. You are not here to defend yourself in every room. You're not required to provide the footnotes to your boundaries. You're not obligated to soften your decisions just because someone's feelings are louder than their self-awareness. Seneca said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." So stay still, stay rooted, stay in alignment with your values, because they can twist the story. They can even gather a following, but they can't unwrite the truth you live with daily. They can't erase your peace. They can't match your clarity. And most importantly, they can't stay consistent in their act forever. Eventually, the performance cracks, the crowd thins, and all that's left is you, and the peace they tried so hard to break. So, breathe. You're not who they say you are. You're who you've become in the silence they couldn't manipulate. And the next tactic, it's even more subtle, more dangerous. It doesn't show up in words, but in whispers. It's the tactic that turns friends into skeptics, truth into suspicion, and your reputation into a chessboard. It's called the slow poison of suggestion. And in the next part, we're going to expose it fully. Stay with me. They smile at you in public, but behind the scenes, they're planting seeds. Not truth, not accusations, but something more effective. Doubt. You see, when someone can no longer control you, they start working to control how others see you. It's not a confrontation. It's not an open betrayal. It's a subtle sabotage of your reputation through well-placed pauses, loaded compliments, and vague unease. They don't call you a liar. They just say, "Something feels different lately." They don't say you're selfish. They just sigh and say, "I hope they're okay. I've been worried." They don't accuse you directly. They let other people fill in the blanks. It's strategic, it's quiet, and it works, unless you know exactly what it is. This is the manipulation of suggestion, not designed to break you face to face, but to erode the support around you until you begin to feel isolated, misunderstood, paranoid. Because they don't need to win. They just need you to feel alone. That's the setup. Because when you're isolated, when people start pulling back, looking at you differently, treating you like something's wrong, even though no one will say it, you begin to second-guess yourself. That's the goal. Not to fight you, but to make you doubt your clarity and crave their validation again. It's not an argument. It's not revenge. It's a game of perception. And they're not aiming at your pride. They're aiming at your relationships. This is where many people cave, not because they miss the manipulator, but because they miss the connection they used to have before everything started to feel distant. So let's be clear. You are not crazy. You are being targeted indirectly by someone who is afraid of what your peace reveals. And since they can't control your behavior, they will try to poison your image and make you feel like the source of the chaos you escaped. But that's a lie. And like all lies, it can't hold under the weight of the truth for long. Seneca said, "The truth is simple. Lies require complication." And when someone starts complicating the story, introducing uncertainty, raising subtle suspicions without clarity, you can be sure they're hiding their motives in the fog of social manipulation. Let me tell you a story. There's a man I know. Let's call him Eric. He worked in a competitive team environment, smart, capable, principled. One day, he refused to cut a corner on a project, even though a colleague pushed for it. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "No, that's not the kind of work I do." From that moment, the energy shifted, not with a blow-up, but with small whispers. Eric's been a little rigid lately, don't you think? He's kind of hard to collaborate with. Something's off. I can't put my finger on it. No direct complaints, no conflict, just enough noise to shift perception. And soon, people started pulling away, avoiding meetings, keeping him out of decisions. He could feel it. The quiet distancing, the looks, the coldness. But Eric didn't chase the rumors. He didn't walk into the room swinging with explanations. He didn't ask for validation or sympathy. He stayed consistent, professional, grounded. And over time, the people who really watched saw the truth. Because while the manipulator complicated everything, Eric stayed simple. And that clarity? It outlasted the whispers. Eventually, the one who tried to spin the narrative got caught in their own contradictions. Because manipulation might win the moment, but only integrity survives the long run. So how do you respond when someone starts twisting the perception of who you are? 3 things. First, don't chase the story. That's what they want. For you to panic, to try defending yourself to everyone, to look unstable while they stay calm and concerned. Stay still. Let them burn their energy while you preserve yours. Second, stay consistent. Keep showing up with character, clarity, and calm. The people worth keeping won't be swayed by subtle lies. They'll notice the contrast between who you are and what's being whispered. Let your life become the contradiction to their fiction. Third, trust that time reveals patterns. This is Stoic armor. You don't need fast justice. You need durable truth. And truth, when it's lived, not just spoken, has a way of cutting through every disguise. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's the compass. That's how you win. Not by reacting, not by retaliating, but by refusing to be drawn into the same distortion you just escaped from. And if they succeed in turning people against you, let them. The people who believe a whisper over your character were never with you in the first place, and the people meant to walk with you, they'll see you, not through hearsay, not through gossip, but through your actions. Your alignment, your silence, because silence, when intentional, becomes unshakable power. Let them complicate. You keep it simple. Let them whisper. You walk in daylight. Let them try to twist who you are. You keep becoming. The tactic they'll try next? It's even more isolating. Not physical distance, not social sabotage, but guilt. That slow, heavy feeling in your chest that makes you want to apologize for finally choosing yourself. And in the next part, we'll break down how manipulators use guilt like a leash and how to cut it without losing your empathy. Breathe. You're doing better than you think. Let's keep going. They used to try to control you through conflict. Now they try to control you through compassion. When force doesn't work, when shame doesn't land, when their victim performance doesn't pull you back in, they reach for something that's harder to see, harder to name, and even harder to shake. Guilt. Not the healthy kind, not the kind that leads to growth or apology. No, this is the weaponized kind. The guilt that's crafted not to heal, but to hook. Because the manipulator knows something about you. You have a heart, you care, you reflect. You don't want to hurt people, and they use that goodness against you. Suddenly, it's, after everything I've done for you, I guess none of that mattered, huh? Wow, so this is who you really are? They twist kindness into currency. They turn memories into leverage. They dig through your past and find the moments they helped you. Not because they cherish them, but because they can weaponize them. But here's what they'll never admit. Real love doesn't keep score. Real connection doesn't invoice you for your boundaries. If someone only supported you so they could control you later, it was never love. It was a loan with hidden interest. And now that you're choosing your peace, they want repayment. Not in money, in obedience. This is the trap. Because guilt, especially when it's tied to someone you once loved or respected, doesn't show up as pressure. It shows up as self-doubt. You start asking yourself, am I being selfish? Am I overreacting? Am I turning into the person they warned me about? No, you're not being selfish. You're being sovereign, and that's what they fear. Because when you are no longer reactive, when you pause before apologizing, when you don't immediately fold at the sound of their disappointment, they realize they've lost the most powerful tool they had: access to your conscience. Let me tell you a story. Her name is Danielle. She grew up in a family where guilt was currency. Every favor, every act of help, every moment of love came with strings so thin you couldn't see them, until you tried to move. And then you felt the tension. She got a great job opportunity, out of state, good pay, meaningful work. She was excited, nervous, yes, but proud. When she told her aunt, someone who had supported her during hard times, she expected a hug. Instead, she got a sigh. I guess family doesn't mean as much to you anymore. No rage, no yelling, just that look, that voice, that guilt-soaked disappointment. And it worked, for a while. Danielle nearly turned it down. She questioned whether she was abandoning the people who'd once been there for her. Until one night, she asked herself one question. Would I ever say that to someone I love? The answer? No. And that's when it hit her. Real love doesn't manipulate. Real support doesn't charge interest. And guilt isn't a love language. So she took the job. She stopped over-explaining. She started building a life rooted in clarity, not shame. The fallout? Some people pulled away. Some narratives were spun. But her peace? Untouched. That's the power of stepping out of the guilt trap. Seneca said, "No person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have." The manipulator doesn't just want access to you. They want access to your emotional thermostat. And when they can no longer heat you with shame or cool you with blame, they try to leave you freezing in guilt. Don't let them. Because guilt only has power when you believe you've done something wrong. Setting a boundary isn't wrong. Choosing your peace isn't wrong. Saying no isn't wrong. What's wrong is allowing someone else to hijack your emotional compass just because they once did you a favor. So how do you break free? First, name the tactic. Say it to yourself plainly. This is not guilt. This is manipulation. Because once seen clearly, the spell begins to break. Second, ask this Stoic question before responding. am I doing this out of truth or out of fear? If the only reason you're saying yes is because you're afraid of the discomfort that comes with no, pause. Third, choose clarity over kindness. Not cruelty, clarity. Say what you mean, firmly, and leave no loose threads. Example, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but my decisions aren't up for debate. This isn't rejection, it's self-respect. You don't have to be harsh, you just have to be whole. And wholeness often offends those who relied on your fragmentation. They liked you better when you were uncertain, when you apologized just for breathing too loudly, when you bent before they even asked. But those days are done, because now you understand guilt is not a guide, it's a ghost, and it only haunts the rooms you refuse to close. So close them, not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. Let them sit in their discomfort. Let them wonder why their guilt isn't working anymore. Let them realize they lost access to the version of you that mistook self-abandonment for loyalty. You've outgrown that. And now, the tactic they'll use next is the one most people fall for. It's not anger. It's not shame. It's not guilt. It's kindness. But not the real kind, the fake kind. The one they use when they realize they can't beat you anymore. So they pretend they've changed, just to get back in. That's where we go in the final part, the most deceptive tactic of all, reconciliation as a trap, and how to spot it before you let the same storm back in wearing new clothes. Stay sharp. We're almost there. They tried everything. Shame, guilt, silence, rumors. None of it worked. You didn't break, you didn't fold, you didn't crawl back just to be accepted. So now they do the one thing you're least prepared for. They come back kind, not soft, not healed, just strategic. Their voice is gentler, their tone more thoughtful. They don't accuse anymore. They reflect. They admit they were wrong. They say they've been thinking. They say they miss you. And for a moment, you believe it. Because it sounds like growth. It looks like maturity. It feels like closure. But underneath it all, it's still a play for control, just in a better disguise. Because when manipulation fails, they try to re-enter as peace. Let's pause here. This part, it's the most dangerous. Because it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like healing. But healing isn't words, it's change. And change, it's not just what they say, it's what they sustain. Anyone can apologize, anyone can cry, anyone can say, I've changed. But the Stoic doesn't listen to apologies. They observe patterns. So ask yourself this, do they respect your boundaries now? Or are they just getting better at walking around them? Because here's what you'll notice if you're paying close attention. They don't say, what do you need? They say, let's just go back to how things were. They don't ask how they made you feel. They talk about how much they've suffered in your absence. They don't meet you where you are. They try to pull you back to where you used to be. Why? Because they don't want a new relationship. They want the same control, repackaged in softer words. Let me tell you a story. Her name is Naomi. She left a man who drained her for years, emotionally, spiritually, silently. No big fight, just a quiet escape. No contact, therapy, growth. She moved forward, and then, months later, he came back. Apologetic, gentle, owning his faults. He said all the right things. I see it now. I've been doing the work. You didn't deserve that. I miss the way you made me feel. Naomi paused. She wanted to believe him, because believing meant closure. It meant it wasn't all for nothing. So she let him in, slowly. And for a while, things were better. He was kind, patient, present. But then came the small comments. the subtle pressure, the questions loaded with expectation, the guilt that slid back in like smoke under a door. And she realized this wasn't reconciliation. It was reset, the same control, just with better manners. That's when she left again. For the last time, not because she hated him, but because she finally loved herself enough to stop waiting for his performance to become reality. Epictetus said, "He who does not observe deceit is not truly wise." Discernment is not cruelty, it's clarity. And the strongest thing you can do is resist the desire to believe someone has changed just because they're saying what you always wished they would. You don't judge change by words, you judge it by friction, by whether your boundaries are met with respect or resistance wrapped in charm. So how do you spot a fake reconciliation? First, watch for pressure disguised as nostalgia. They'll say, "I just want to go back to how it used to be." But the past didn't hurt them, it hurt you. Don't go back to pain just because it's familiar. Second, look at consistency, not intensity. Real change isn't dramatic, it's boring, it's steady, it's quiet. If they're rushing the process, it's not about healing, it's about regaining access. Third, ask yourself, am I responding to who they are now, or who I once hoped they could become? Because most people fall back in, not from weakness, but from memory. You miss the potential, but potential isn't a person. It's a projection, and you deserve reality. So, what do you do when someone shows up kind again, changed again, promising again? You pause, you observe, you say, "I believe in change, but not without evidence." And then you watch. Because if it's real, it will hold under pressure. If it's fake, it will fold the moment you say no. And if you're still not sure, wait. Time reveals everything a sweet voice can hide. Here's the Stoic truth most people don't want to accept. Not every apology deserves access. Not every memory is a map. And not every return is redemption. Sometimes people come back, not because they've changed, but because they missed the control they had when you didn't know better. But now you know. You know how control hides in kindness, how guilt speaks in whispers, how manipulation evolves when silence no longer works. And you know how to stand still when the storm comes back, wearing perfume. Because peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. It's the quiet confidence that says, "I don't need to prove I've grown. My silence will speak." Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who injured you." So let your response be quiet. Let your distance be sacred. Let your silence echo louder than their sweetened words. And when the dust settles, don't explain. Don't defend. Just live. Aligned, undefended, clear. Because in the end, they'll realize something they never expected. You didn't just escape them. You outgrew them. And that's the kind of freedom they'll never be able to mimic. So here's your journal prompt. What part of me still wants to believe the performance? And what would happen if I finally let go of the fantasy? Write it, sit with it, and let it teach you something about what you truly deserve. You don't need to go back to prove anything. Your growth is already the proof. You don't need a final conversation. Your silence is the closing line. And you don't need to rebuild with people who only show up when they think you're weak enough to say yes. Your power, it's not loud, it's not bitter, it's not vengeful, it's still, and it's permanent. They can't control you anymore, and they know it. That's why they're trying so hard to come back in through kindness. But you've already moved forward through clarity, and this time, you're not going back. Because you finally understand, not everyone deserves access to the healed version of you that they helped break. Stay sharp, stay calm, stay free. This is pure Stoic life. Until next time.